Hey guys, and welcome to Petrol, and welcome to this week's Midweek 180. Now, this week is a little bit different because I want to do a tribute to Ayrton Senna, because would you believe it, it's 25 years to the day since we lost perhaps the greatest racing driver of all time. So I asked you last week what your thoughts and any special memories or things that always make you think of him, and we're going to run through a few of those. But before we do that, I just want to run through a little bit of housekeeping. So last week's leaders of the pack, the first to comment was Trevor's Videos, and a big shout out to William and Thomas, who regularly contribute, but that's your first leader of the pack. And my famous five were Noisy Man X, Clark W, Gibran Somra and Vinny Vincent. So whoever puts the first comment this week, you will be my leader of the pack next week, and the first 5 comments you will be in my famous 5. Well, last week, where are you and what you're doing? Well, that was James Yowell, who was on a beach in Muddyford, eating calamari and drinking cider. Very civilised indeed. But wherever you are right now, and whatever you're doing, put it in the comments below, and I'll give you a shout out next week. Now, we're not going to be running a timer this week, so it's actually not going to be a midweek 180 at all, really. But let's get on to the subject of Ayrton Senna. Now, I have to put something out there straight away. Back in the day, I wasn't actually a massive fan of Ayrton Senna. I respected him and admired him for the amazing driver he was, but I was always a massive Williams and Mansell nut, basically. I was a big Nigel Mansell fan. Always supported Williams right back from the days of people like Alan Jones and Keke Rosberg. So McLaren were the enemy really for me back then, even though I've now subsequently become a huge McLaren fan. And this is about as because Senna obviously raced for McLaren when they're in their major Honda era. So this is my little tribute to him. I know it's a contemporary jacket. So I guess really if we go back to the day, that fateful day, it was actually a weekend of amazing tragedy really, Imola in '94, because on the Friday, Rubens Barrichello had one of the biggest motor accidents I've ever seen, and honestly to this day you look at the footage and I don't know how he walked away from that. It was a horrific accident, and that kind of put a sour tone on the whole race weekend. And then the often forgotten man, clearly on Saturday, there was a horrendous crash and we lost Roland Ratzenberger. And I always feel a little bit sorry, people often refer to Senna and so on for that weekend, but we mustn't forget that we lost Roland Ratzenberger that weekend as well. And that really put a massive taint on the weekend. And I know if you've watched the Senna film, there was he really didn't know whether to race or not that weekend, and he ended up doing that, and clearly we all know the consequences. But I can remember watching the race. I was at university at the time. I was in my house that we rented, and we all gathered around the TV watching it because we're all race fans, and it was just a surreal thing. So very, very sad. For me though, my personal highlight of his career, the thing I always remember him for, was Donington in 1993. Not only because I was there, but it's probably gone down, that first lap of the European Grand Prix at Donington in 93 has gone down as probably one of the best laps of all time, certainly the best opening lap of all time. He actually started 4th on the grid, but dropped back to 5th after a poor start. But by the end of the first lap, he was in first. And having raced a couple of times now at Donington Park, and that was the track I went to when I was a kid, to watch what he did, to go round the outside on the Craner curves, and it was just a magical, magical lap. But the interesting thing is that he knew all the kind of extra lines because it was raining. He went offline. Donington has a very local airport, so you get the jets flying over and lots of jet fuel on the circuit. So the racing line's incredibly slippy, and Senna knew this, and he kind of drove off the racing line, found the extra grip, and the rest is history. Absolutely stunning, stunning race. So how about some of your thoughts and memories of Senna? I'm going to start with 68 Tony N. Great story. In 1992 at the Monaco Grand Prix, actually met Ayrton Senna and ended up chatting with him for about 20 minutes. And the cool thing is at the end of that, Ayrton signed a photograph and a pair of gloves, and he still has those hanging on his wall today. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Guilherme Campanheiro, a Brazilian peddler, often comments on videos. He's basically mentioned the epic win in the Sao Paulo Brazilian Grand Prix in '91. Now again, look back, there's plenty of clips of this online, but he was in the lead and then started to have gearbox problems, was stuck in 6th gear for the back end of the race, and hung on because it started raining to win. But the famous clips of him being basically lifted out the car, and he had to peel his hands off of the steering wheel because he was so exhausted from the efforts of winning. Brilliant race. Now, I have a quote, Global Nomad. Now, you may well have heard the quote from Senna about him, if you don't go for a gap, you're not a racing driver, one of his most famous quotes. But I'd never heard this one before. I'm going to read it out. It was more of a kind of comment. And Senna said, you go over the edge so you know exactly where it is. Pull back a little and get as close to it as possible. Other drivers, he said, were scared of going over and off, so never got as close to the edge as he did. Do that for a whole lap and you're ahead. Going safely beyond the limit is the key to knowing how to be right on the limit. And for me, that sums up the driver. I mean, he was able to do things in a race car that no one else was. If you look at some of the footage of him, I love the onboard footage of him in Monaco, in the kind of, over 1,000 horsepower in the McLaren, and it's a manual change box and the car's squirming everywhere. Just exceptional. And then the last couple of stories, Richard Earthy, again another meeting up story. So at the Goodyear tyre test in Silverstone in '92, bumped into him coming out of the Ferrari transporter and chatted for a good while and joked about him potentially driving for Ferrari one day. And I love that one. The story I'm going to finish with is a very, very good friend of mine. It goes back to the Donington weekend. Now, this friend of mine actually was a manager at the hotel where the McLaren team was staying, and got quite friendly with the team and Ron Dennis and so on, was invited on race day to go to watch the race at Donington Park with the team. And he was actually invited to go there in the helicopter that they flew in. So they all flew in, the major kind of senior people in the team flew into Donington by helicopter, and my mate went with them in the helicopter. And clearly we know what happened that race. Ayrton won. But the weather turned really nasty. It rained, the cloud cover came down, and apparently once the race was finished, the helicopter was unable to take off because the cloud cover was too low. So the team was basically stuck at Donington Park. So they basically commandeered a minibus to drive back to the hotel. And my mate's in there with Ron and a few of the other mechanics and senior people in the team. And then the next thing, Ayrton Senna rocks up and gets in the minibus, but then basically says, well, no one else is driving this except me. And Ayrton Senna drove the minibus back to the hotel. My mate sat in the back thinking, is this really happening to me? And for me, that what an amazing memory that must be. But I'm sure you guys have got your Ayrton Senna stories and Ayrton Senna memories. Put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. I kind of hope you've enjoyed this little bit of a twist on the Midweek 180. Every now and again, it would be nice to do something a little bit different, to remember great racing drivers or great personalities in the automotive world. Any suggestions, put them in the comments below. If you like this style of video, then that would be great. I do want to just remind you of 2 videos. My video from Monday this week is basically me having a Performance Pack 2 Stage 2 remap fitted to Ruby Roadster. I will put a link above. You need to go and head off and see that one. And this Friday's video at 6 is the brand new Abarth 595 SS. I got to drive the SS. It's the first one in the country. It's not even out to the members of the public. You can't buy one yet. So one of the first reviews coming to you on Friday at 6. You need to tune into that one. It's a goodie. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have done so, please give me a thumbs up. Comments below are always welcome, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Petrol Ped for plenty more content to come, and I'll see you on the next film, which is this Friday at 6 for the Abarth 595 SS. I'll see you on that, guys. You take care. Drive safe.